B. Collins.
Peter B. Collins, news and comment. It's Thursday, November 7th, 2019. Just a week ago was Halloween. And here in the San Francisco Bay Area, a group of people rented a fancy house on Airbnb, spread the news on social media, and at the Halloween party that followed, 5 people were shot and killed. Additional individuals were wounded, and we still don't have any suspects in that case. But I credit the San Francisco Chronicle, because they're reporting today that nationwide, in just the past 6 months, 42 people have been shot at Airbnb houses where parties were hosted, and 17 have been killed. That's 5 here in the Bay Area and a dozen around the country. 4 people shot, 1 fatally on May 31st in West Covina, California. June 12th, Charlotte, North Carolina, 4 people shot, 1 fatally at a graduation party. July 21st in Fair Oaks, that's Sacramento, a man was fatally shot during a large party at an Airbnb rental. July 30th, Columbus, Ohio, 5 people injured in a shooting at an Airbnb rental. On August 19th in St. Paul, Minnesota, a man was shot and killed at a gathering at an Airbnb rental. It was a birthday party for a woman who had turned 20. In L.A. County, September 9th, a man was shot and killed outside a large party at a home that was rented on Airbnb. And October 27 in Sacramento, a man fatally shot at a house party there. Now, I have only used Airbnb once this past summer when we were traveling in Europe. I rented a place for a couple of nights in Split, Croatia, and overall it was a good experience. It's kind of weird when you're staying in somebody else's home. I just have to say that. But this is one of the disruptive consequences of these upstart companies, almost all based here in San Francisco or in Silicon Valley. And those unintended consequences are not fully vetted. When people say, hey, I have a neat idea. And these services where people, allow others to use their cars for a couple of hours a day. I mean, there's only so far I'm willing to go to trust human nature. And I'd be very reluctant to rent out my own home to people I don't know just for some extra cash. So I hope that some new regulation will follow. Airbnb has already announced it is going to investigate every listing in its inventory worldwide. But are they just paying lip service? They're just going to go through the motions? That's a whole lot of listings to investigate. Airbnb also says that they're going to put out in major urban areas teams that will go and inspect some of the rentals that might be suspected to be used for party activities. And there's a lot of finger-pointing that goes on. The people who own the house in Orinda, that's the Tony community where 5 people were killed here on Halloween night. They point fingers and say, well, it's Airbnb's fault, and Airbnb says it's the owner's fault. But these are issues I think we have to come to terms with, and we really need to confront the lack of regulation of these upstart industries, starting with Google and Facebook, Twitter. Oh, my God. So I give the Chronicle credit for exposing the dirty history just in the past 6 months of party houses at Airbnb rentals. Meanwhile, in Washington, Roger Stone's trial is continuing. He is the Republican dirty trickster, friend of Trump, who appears to be at the center of claims that Russia hacked the DNC and gave that information to WikiLeaks. And it's interesting because in the early legal skirmishing in the trial, Roger Stone wanted to present evidence that Russia didn't hack the DNC, or at least that it hasn't been proven. And while I find Roger Stone to be one of the most loathsome individuals on the planet, I would cheer that if the judge had actually permitted it. So the government says that when Roger Stone was called to Congress to testify that he lied, he covered up, he said he didn't have information that he did have. And so the jury is seeing emails, text messages, call records documenting Roger Stone's communications with the campaign about the time that he was in touch with Randy Credico, who is a lefty, and Jerome Corsi, who is off the charts on the right, both of whom had some interactions with WikiLeaks and were apparently the go-betweens who were used. Now, so far, I'm not seeing any evidence that either supports or rebuts the notion that Russia hacked the DNC. This is really focused on the fact that WikiLeaks already had the Clinton emails, the John Podesta email traffic, and the DNC emails. Those are separate packages, right? They all get lumped together in the media coverage. So the attorney for Roger Stone is named Bruce Rogow, and he tried to draw a distinction between Russian interference in the election and the role of WikiLeaks and Assange in releasing the DNC emails. And Rogow argued that the House Intelligence Committee had said that the subject of its investigation was Russian interference and made no explicit mention of WikiLeaks or Assange in announcing that investigation or in its communications with Stone about his voluntary testimony. He said the government was right that the jury would see text, emails, and Stone's testimony, but what also mattered was Stone's intent when he gave information to Congress. And here's the part, and this is the voice of a reporter at BuzzFeed, and of course they're big promoters of the Russiagate narrative. Quoting the article, leading up to the trial, the judge rebuffed Stone's challenges to the indictment as well as his efforts to use the trial as a forum to criticize the Russia investigation and, get this, push the unsubstantiated conspiracy theory that Russia wasn't involved in hacking the DNC. And as you know, my investigation and my examination of the so-called evidence is that the claim that Russia hacked the DNC is an unsubstantiated conspiracy theory. But in September, the judge denied Stone's request to introduce evidence related to the origins of the emails in possession of WikiLeaks. So Stone is charged with lying or giving misleading information to the House on a number of subjects, including allegedly saying he didn't have any records of communications about the hacked DNC materials when he did, saying that he hadn't directed associates to contact WikiLeaks when he had. Now, these are assertions from the voice of the reporter here, okay? This is not yet proven by evidence that I am aware of. It continues, saying he only had one intermediary with WikiLeaks when there were two, Credico and Corsi, and saying that he hadn't discussed his conversations with any intermediary with the Trump campaign when he had. And then we have the issues of Roger Stone threatening Randy Credico. And this, I believe, is the most salient charge that is likely to be sustained unless testimony from Credico, who is expected to take the stand, somehow undermines this. But in April of 2018, Roger Stone emailed Credico, "You are a rat, a stoolie. You backstab your friends. I am so ready. Let's get it on. Prepare to die." So we know that Roger Stone is an inflammatory guy who loves to use this kind of strong language. He was a colleague of Roy Cohn. Roy Cohn will resurface later in this podcast in the dreams of Donald Trump. So, according to Michelle Taylor, an FBI agent who took the stand today, when asked how many written communications Roger Stone had with Randy Credico, and I believe he said there were none, the FBI agent said 72. So maybe Roger Stone's going to get convicted on that charge too. Now, his defense appears to be so far that he was played. And he, of course, is an operator himself who wouldn't want to be characterized that way. But in the interests of avoiding the long arm of the law, I think Roger Stone will say anything. He's a proven liar and opportunist. It'll be interesting if he takes the stand in his own defense. Well, today, John Bolton was invited to come up for a little interview before the House impeachment investigation on Capitol Hill, and he sent his regrets. He also has set a new hurdle to his participation in impeachment. He said that he will only show up if a court orders him to do so. And he is represented by the same guy as this fellow Kupperman. Kupperman has made the same claim that he is caught in the middle between Trump and the order not to testify and the subpoenas or other demands coming from the Congress. So Bolton does appear to have been deeply upset by the whole Ukraine gambit. It may have been one of the reasons why he quit or got fired for quitting. And so we may not see Mr. Mustache actually testify before the impeachment proceedings, either this preliminary part or when public hearings start up next week. But an aide to Vice President Pence, whose name is Jennifer Williams, she's a national security advisor, longtime State Department employee, she did go up to the Hill and offer we don't have any leaks so far of what she said and what the questions were, but she did actually participate. And the Democrats in control of these proceedings have notified the Republicans that they have until this Saturday to provide a list of witnesses for public impeachment hearings. And, of course, the Democrats, I believe, have the authority in the majority to sift through those requests and decide which ones to grant. Now, there is continuing wrangling among the Democratic caucus on the scope of the impeachment proceedings. And as you know, I believe that it is folly to rely primarily or solely on Ukraine-gate as the basis for impeachment. Now, I do acknowledge that my initial skepticism has been in many ways reduced by the wave of people coming forth with damaging testimony and significant testimony about a quid pro quo. I still don't think that it is this clear-cut case and an easy sell that the Democrats claim. And Jamie Raskin, who is a congressman, I think, from Maryland, a Democrat, he sits on Judiciary and Oversight, and he's a constitutional law professor. He says some people may want to try and charge everything the president has done wrong over the course of his career. Obviously, we can't do that. And I say, why not? You know, you can have 4 articles of impeachment, and the 4th one could be a laundry list. And Pelosi is telling people not to try to promote articles of impeachment related to the caging of children at the border, his racist and bigoted statements. Rashida Tlaib of Detroit, she wants an impeachment article based on racist abuse of power. And Al Green, one of the early proponents of impeachment, congressman from Texas, has said that at least one article concerning his bigotry infused into policy. But Pelosi says, you know, those are things that you take up at the election. But nobody's talking about Michael Cohen. And if you're a daily listener here, you might be fed up with Peter B. Collins talking about Michael Cohen. But damn it to heck, it is the slam dunk criminal act that has already been proven against Trump. Michael Cohen is in prison as a result of his plea deal where he said Individual One ordered him to pay hush money. Actually, they did pay it to Stormy Daniels via Michael Cohen himself, and they stiffed the National Enquirer, which bought the rights to the story of the Playboy playmate. I think her name is McDougal. And I cannot understand, for the life of me, why the Democrats don't say, okay, we're investigating Ukraine-gate in addition to the proven criminal behavior of Donald J. Trump. I just don't get it. Every day I pause for a second to thank the people who support my work here at the Peter B. Collins Podcast with your subscriptions. And there are a lot of great people who send me $5 or $10 a month. People like Margaret Anderson, who just set up a new subscription, Patrick Garay, Abby McMillan, and our good pal John Zwiebel over in Kauai. John drops a check every month, the first of the month, for $10 into my P.O. box, and I appreciate that. And John needs to vent a little bit. He's reacting to some of my venting about Pacific Gas and Electric. And before I get to his venting, I have to let you know that the podcast is a little behind schedule today because your humble host arrived to darkness here at the secret studio. I went to the dentist this morning. I showed up here a little later than usual, but it didn't matter because the power was out and had been all morning. And when I called to get an estimate of restoration, the PG&E call center is still a mess, even after the efforts to clean it up after our recent massive intentional power outages. So over on Kauai, John experienced that on October 28th, there was a fiber optic cable that was cut between Oahu and Kauai. John thinks it happened Sunday around midnight. His internet service completely off. His cell phone had unintelligible connections. The checkout line at Safeway backed up because everybody uses plastic. The local radio station explained the fiber cut and suggested it would be days, if not weeks, for a repair. But it returned within about 24 hours, and then it went down again on Friday, November 1st. And his closing remarks, doesn't this remind you of the 737 MAX fiasco, or the PG&E fiasco, or the failure of warning systems throughout California for all the fires? Doesn't this speak volumes about the false ballistic missile warning Hawaii received a couple of years ago? And he closes with fucking capitalism. Yeah. Meanwhile, the Trump team is all over Twitter. And I don't follow any of these jerks on Twitter, so I keep myself fresh and unpoisoned. But Donnie Jr. and Trump himself are leading the charge to vilify Lieutenant Colonel Vindman. And Alexander Vindman is the guy who heard the call. He was born in Ukraine, but he's an American citizen and a decorated American soldier. But the Whisper campaign is active, questioning his dual loyalties. You can't do that with an Israeli, but you can do it with a Ukrainian person, I guess. And now there's a guy who's surfaced, kind of like the Swift boaters who went after John Kerry, claiming to have witnessed Colonel Vindman bash America in a conversation with Russian officers in Germany in 2013. That would be 6 years ago. That's how desperate they are. The only thing they've got on this guy is an overheard conversation from 6 years ago. And I'm not going to drag you through it, but Vindman denies it, and his colleagues say that the guy who claims to have overheard it doesn't speak Russian and wouldn't have known what they were saying anyway. I mentioned Roy Cohn a little bit earlier, and in a recent podcast I talked about the new documentary, Where's My Roy Cohn? It's worth seeing. He's one of the ugliest figures in the 20th century in the United States. A self-hating homosexual, a red-baiting opportunist who supported Joe McCarthy. And Roy Cohn is the guy that Trump wanted to install at the Justice Department, and the best he could come up with is Bill Barr. And he's publicly tried to get Bill Barr to come out and defend him over the phone call with the president of Ukraine. And Bill Barr got the request, and I don't know if he said no, but he's never said yes. And the White House goes to great lengths to say that Barr and Trump remain on good terms, but Trump has been grumbling to his friends that Bill Barr doesn't have his back and won't come out and exonerate him in public. And the Washington Post digs into this and notes how Barr has generally supported Trump, the way he handled the summary of the Mueller investigation report. But there is an effort, it appears, by Bill Barr to put a little distance between himself and that sinking ship over at the White House. And so Barr's allies say that the Attorney General's been unhappy with Rudy Giuliani, especially for going outside of normal channels. Ha! So I love to see these people squirming. They deserve it. And it'll remain to be seen at what point Bill Barr says, this could be fatal to me. Prepare the lifeboats. And the guy who was there for 2 years before Bill Barr took over this past year at the Justice Department, Jefferson Beauregard Sessions III, well, he's gunning for some revenge. He announced yesterday that I guess it's today he is announcing that he will run for his old Senate seat and try to take it away from Doug Jones, who has done a miserable job in the U.S. Senate, always voting with the Republicans because he knew that Jeff Sessions was going to try to reclaim this seat. But Doug, even in corrupt Alabama, people know whether you're a real Democrat or not. And you ain't. So I suspect that Jeff Sessions will prevail come November a year. Today, Trump did it again. He used Twitter to brag about alleged developments in negotiations with China in his self-inflicted trade war. And the market shot up. As I've pointed out, Twitter does not allow Elon Musk to do that. He needs adult supervision before he's allowed to tweet about Tesla or his other companies. But not Trump. He affects the whole economy. And I don't believe what they're saying. The Times reports the U.S. and China have agreed that an initial trade deal between the two countries would roll back a portion of the tariffs placed on each other's products. A significant step toward defusing. Next sentence, the so-called Phase 1 agreement has not yet been finalized, and a deal could fail to materialize. This is bullshit. This is just speculation promoted by Trump to distract people from the trade war that he started and the fact that China is a very tough adversary on trade issues. His tweet, stock market up big today, a new record. Enjoy. Right. Well, on the heels of that, enjoy this, Don. The state of New York, state court judge, has ordered the Trump Foundation to pay $2 million in damages to a collection of nonprofit groups. Now, the Trump Foundation closed its doors last December, and the lawsuit said the foundation engaged in a shocking pattern of illegality. Trump breached his fiduciary duty. They said it was basically just a checkbook posing as a charity. And this is interesting. I want to compare domestic initiative by Trump and now the resistance that he's getting from his own political appointees to what he did in Syria. A few weeks ago, for the third time, he announced that all U.S. troops are coming out, and as we will see in a moment, that's not actually happening. So, on the domestic issue, it's the First Step Act, advocated by Van Jones, Jared Kushner, because his daddy was in jail for a while, and Jessica Jackson was living here in Marin County. She's now moved to Washington to work full-time on Cut 50. And I give Jessica Jackson and Van Jones credit for being able to hold their noses and work with Trump and work with the Kardashians and Kanye West. And so the First Step Act is a minimal effort. It affects only a small number of federal prisoners, mostly those who were victims of Joe Biden's crack cocaine law. But now we learn that some of the people who Trump has released may go back to jail if the Barr Justice Department has its way. And the Washington Post uses as an example a guy named Gregory Allen, who showed up at the White House, gave Trump a shout-out, said he's making America great again by letting him out of prison. And Allen was convicted of cocaine trafficking back in 2001. And over at the Justice Department, they want to play some games to return him to federal prison. Now, what this really shows is that Trump is incompetent at running the government and getting his own directives and laws that he supported carried out by his own political appointees. Jerry Nadler, chair of the House Judiciary, accused the Justice Department last month of trying to sabotage the law by interpreting it in a way that is adverse to those who have been released or on the list to be released. And a federal judge, Richard Lazara in Tampa, rejected the argument that this guy Allen should be returned to prison. Congress says what it means and means what it says, and I don't have any authority to fiddle with what they've said. Well said, sir. Our vice president for marketing in the Northeast, Del Leonard, emailed me the other day and said, hey, did you see Maria Butina interviewed on 60 Minutes? Well, Del, I finally got around to it last night, and I was impressed with Maria Butina. She came off a little angry because Leslie Stahl, the 60 Minutes correspondent, kept trying to paint her as a Russian spy, as Putin's eyeballs in the United States. And as James Bamford has pointed out, and we have repeatedly told you, Maria Butina was a gun rights activist in Russia. She cozied up to the NRA in an effort to try to replicate that in Russia. And yes, she got tripped up in the Mueller investigation. But even Mueller's crew backed off. They said, she really didn't use sex to try to curry influence with people. She wasn't really a spy. She failed to register as a foreign agent. That's what she was convicted of. But Leslie Stahl would hear none of it. And even as Butina, in my view, told the truth, they trotted out the prosecutor who framed her, Butina, as this dastardly Russian spy who was here to undermine America and sow negative influence in our election. And it turns my stomach to watch that bullshit. And it reminds me of the way Leslie Stahl went to Guantanamo Bay 5-6 years ago and didn't even know who Shocker Ammer was when he tried to engage her from his prison cell. I mean, the 60 Minutes, the way that works, the correspondents show up after the interviews have been recorded, and they ask questions that get edited in. That's often the case. I don't know in the Butina case if Stahl actually went to that Florida prison to interview Maria Butina, who is now back in Russia. Well, today, Bernie Sanders unveiled a really damn good immigration plan. He calls for the breakup of ICE, Immigration and Customs Enforcement, and U.S. Customs and Border Protection. And he's not going to eliminate those functions. Nobody can do that. But he wants to return them from Homeland Security, where they currently reside, back to where they came from, the Justice Department or the Treasury Department. But he goes further. He wants a domestic workers' bill of rights, which would provide domestic workers, citizens or not, with a $15 minimum wage, strong protections for collective bargaining, workers' rights, workplace safety, and fair scheduling. Quote, for too long, employers have exploited undocumented immigrants and guest workers to violate labor laws, skirt the minimum wage, and maximize their own profits. Large corporations target vulnerable communities as a source of labor and use their immigration status to retaliate when workers stand up for their rights. Now, he embraces all of the standard boilerplate. He wants to reinstate and expand DACA. He wants to overturn Trump's Muslim ban. But in breaking up ICE and CBP, he would return them to the Department of Justice, the State Department, and the Treasury Department. And I think that is an intelligent way to approach these issues. Meanwhile, Joe Biden went to K Street. That is the infamous street where all the lobbyists and the influence peddlers hang out in Washington, D.C. And while he was picking up cash from corporate interests and lobbyists, he took another swipe at Elizabeth Warren, and he decided to go after her because she had said that, he seems to be running in the Republican primary. And Joe said, well, God love her. That's not the way things get done, man. You don't go in and tell people that they disagree. There's something fundamentally wrong with them. Okay, Joe. Here in San Francisco, I mentioned that Chesa Boudin, a public defender who is the son of Weather Underground members Kathy Boudin and David Harris. Harris, still in federal prison, will be for the rest of his life. Chesa Boudin came very close to winning on election night. But as additional ballots have been counted, he's down by a margin of about 2,000 votes, and that's before we go to the ranked choice delegation of the second choice of people who voted for losing candidates. Well, one of the factors in this very close election is that the Police Officers Association of San Francisco spent over $600,000 on really ugly, misleading ads. They basically claimed that Chesa Boudin was responsible for every crime that ever happened in San Francisco. And yes, I exaggerate slightly, but only slightly. So we have a member of the Board of Supervisors, Sandra Lee Feuer. She's married to a retired cop. She said, as a family who have paid dues for 35 years to the POA, I cannot stay silent and condone the behavior of the organization's leadership. And she led a chant at one of the election night parties, fuck the POA. Now, that was over the top, and it's not particularly helpful, but I echo it. They went way off the rails, and she called them out for it. Well, I mentioned how the president enunciated a policy in Syria that the U.S. is getting out entirely, and we're not. And the New York Times, promoting endless war and continued presence in Syria, trots out William Roebuck, who is a diplomat, the top American diplomat on the ground in northern Syria. He wrote a memo to Washington saying that, we shouldn't have done this the way we did, but we've got to stay here. He said that the plan to remain, here it is, the decision to stay is a good one, even if the protection of the oil rationale plays into toxic Middle Eastern conspiracy theories that will need to be lanced with careful, sustained messaging, reinforcing the truism that Syria's oil is Syria's and for the benefit of the Syrian people. But they keep saying that Trump abandoned the Kurds. Now, if you want some truth and straight talk, go to the Gray Zone Project, where Max Blumenthal is once again a guest of Aaron Mate on Pushback. And I haven't had time to listen to it, but the headline reads, Max Blumenthal on Baghdadi's death and Trump's fake withdrawal from Syria. Over at Mint Press News, Peter Ford points out that if the U.S. manages to come up with some bizarre rationale for stealing oil from Syria as spoils for our unauthorized intervention in the civil war and the proxy wars there, that Britain would similarly be culpable for war crimes in trying to steal Syria's oil. And finally, Emmanuel Macron, president of France, has shocked allies in an interview saying that he didn't know whether NATO's commitment to collective defense is still valid and that the alliance is experiencing brain death because of a lack of strategic coordination and leadership from the United States. Now, he raises some interesting issues. NATO is a confab that includes the United States and, for example, Turkey. And Turkey is now rogue from NATO, running its own operation there in northeast Syria. And so I think there are important issues for NATO to grapple with. But it's not about how much money each nation kicks in. It's about the contemporary mission of NATO. What is it? Because today it is really just an arm of the United States military that is used when we need cover for unilateral actions and we try to make it look like we've got a coalition. Thanks for listening to my ranting and raving, my daily news and comment podcast. You can share it everywhere. You'll find it on YouTube. And I'm still Peter B.
Happy trails to you until we meet again. Happy trails to you. Keep smile